Good morning, everyone. I'm Michelle Wilcox, President and CEO of Crossroads Rhode Island. I want to thank you all for being here today, especially the tremendous group of housing and homelessness leaders standing with us. Your presence speaks volumes about our shared commitment to protecting Rhode Islanders from losing the stable housing that they rely on. I want to thank our partners from House of Hope, Sojourner House, Foster Forward, Amos House, Community Care Alliance, the Housing Network, and so many others for joining us here at the Harold Lewis House. I'm so grateful to have all of you. Crossroads convened this group today because the stakes could not be higher. And I also want to acknowledge the steadfast support we have received from Rhode Island's congressional delegation and our leaders at the State House, including Senator Reed, Senator Whitehouse, Representatives Amo and Magaziner, Governor McKee, Speaker Sicarci, Senate President Lawson, Housing Secretary Goddard, Carol Ventura of Rhode Island Housing, and so many others who have always stood with us. Their partnership has made enormous difference, and we know that partnership is needed now more than ever. We're here today because the newly released federal NOFO, or Notice of Funding Opportunity, represents a direct and immediate threat to the people we serve. If these changes stand, Rhode Island will lose funding for permanent housing programs that keep more than 1,000 of our neighbors, children, families, domestic violence survivors, older Rhode Islanders, and veterans safely housed. Let me be clear. Permanent housing programs in Rhode Island are successful. They work. And the data is overwhelming. When people are connected to safe, stable, affordable homes with the right level of voluntary support, 96% never return to homelessness. Permanent housing ends homelessness, period. The new federal rules did not reflect that success. They drastically slash funding for permanent supportive housing and rapid rehousing. They put new punitive strings on what little funding remains, including requirements that force people into treatment programs or institutional settings in order to keep their housing. And we all know from decades of research and from decades of lived experience that compulsory treatment does not work. You cannot expect someone to stabilize their health, address trauma, or begin recovery if they don't have a safe home to return to after an appointment or meeting. It is simply not how people heal. I also want to address the misconception head on that the Trump administration and others have falsely claimed that permanent supportive housing and other housing first programs caused an increase in homelessness. That's just nonsense. Permanent supportive housing does not cause the rise in homelessness. Permanent supportive housing did not cause the crisis that we are in. The housing crisis caused the homelessness crisis. Years of underbuilding, skyrocketing rents, and the lack of affordable apartments have created conditions that are pushing more Rhode Islanders, especially seniors, low-wage workers, and families, into homelessness for the first time. The housing first approach, which HUD has championed for a decade and a half, has been the one bright spot, the one thing that has consistently worked. And yet, the federal government is now walking away from the only proven solution. We're standing here at the Harold Lewis House for a reason. This is permanent supportive housing at its best. 14 older adults live here today. The housing program we manage here gives preference to veterans. The 14 people who live here are connected to services and supports, and they are building stability after years of struggle. And under the new rules, all 14 residents stand to lose their home. That is the human cost of what we're talking about today. These federal changes go through, if these federal changes go through, the impact will be felt across the state. More than 1,000 formerly homeless Rhode Islanders and 170,000 formerly homeless Americans may lose their home and be forced back into homelessness. Families with young children will get evicted. Young people aging out of foster care will have nowhere to go. Survivors fleeing domestic violence will lose the stability they worked so hard to secure. Veterans who rebuilt their lives in housing will be forced back into crisis. Shelters, public safety agencies, hospitals and emergency rooms, and food pantries will be overwhelmed. And landlords and property managers, many of them small, family-owned businesses, will lose reliable monthly income. This is not hypothetical. This is exactly what will happen, which is why we're speaking out. I want to be frank. We don't have all the answers yet. None of us do. These changes were just released, and providers across Rhode Island and across the country are still analyzing the full implications. But we know enough to sound the alarm today. Just heard the alarm. We know enough to stand together and say, this cannot happen. I'm going to say it again. This cannot happen. Our goal this morning is simple: to raise awareness and make clear that these changes pose a real and immediate danger to real people. We're working closely with our partners across Rhode Island and across the country. We've connected with members of our congressional delegation and with leaders at the State House, and they're well informed about the chilling consequences of these new rules. We will respond and fight back, and we're going to leave every option on the table. So let me close with what guides all of us in this work. Housing is the only proven solution for homelessness. Not shelter, not mandated treatment, and certainly not involuntary institutionalization. Housing keeps people safe. Housing restores dignity. Housing saves lives. We owe it to every Rhode Islander who has fought their way back to stability to protect the programs that work. And we owe it to every Rhode Islander at risk of losing their home to say loudly and clearly, we will not let this happen without a fight. Thank you, and thank you to all of our partners for standing with us today. And now I'd like to invite some of the other COC partners up to speak in alphabetical order, starting with Community Care Alliance's CEO, Ben Lessing. Ben?
Thank you, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today. We have a lot of work ahead of us, particularly in terms of pushing back on this NOFO. I really have one particular message here, and that is housing is health care. Community Care Alliance provides behavioral health services to thousands of individuals, particularly in northern Rhode Island and Woonsocket. We also operate BH Link and an array of substance use treatment services across the state. The thing that I want you to understand, particularly in relation to this NOFO, is that there's an implication here somehow that we've got to toughen up. We've got to push people into self-sufficiency and so forth. We've got to make them get treatment. We've got to mandate them to get treatment. What I can tell you is that across all of our programs, particularly our substance use programs, 75% of the folks who are in those programs now have been formerly unhoused. Okay, they are getting themselves treatment. They are getting themselves into services. They are getting themselves on the road to recovery. And the majority of them are employed. So one of the things that this NOFO puts at risk is our ability to transition those folks out of treatment, if you will, into recovery housing, into permanent supported housing and so forth, which is going to be able to maintain their health. We have seen time and time and time again, whether it's folks who are struggling with behavioral health, people living with HIV, you get them into housing and their health considerations improve almost drastically. The other thing that I want to reference here is kids and families. This will have a huge impact on kids and families. And so, you know, the notion that you can move kids and families from shelter to transitional housing and then to God knows what, you know, in terms of whether or not there's even affordable housing available is just wrong. Kids in these situations are traumatized. They are traumatized by being in shelters. They lose their academic capacity, if you will. You know, they have difficulty in terms of their emotional development. Okay? So the faster that we can move kids and families into permanent housing, the more we're going to improve, particularly those kids' mental health stability and their ability to be able to be successful academically. I think the thing that I want to close with is I'm reminded of there's a Nigerian author by the name of Chimamanda Adichie, who recently, not so recently, but several years ago did a TED Talk called The Danger of a Single Story. And the danger of this single story is that we really pigeonhole, you know, folks who are struggling with an issue that is not their issue. To Michelle's point, these are housing conditions that have devolved over decades. Okay, this is not about the failure of individuals or families. This is about systemic issues that we have not attended to in this state or across the country. And so we cannot see this population that is comprised of folks with a whole array of complex issues. We cannot see them as the reason that we have a housing crisis. You know, we need to get them into housing, we need to save lives, and we need to treat folks with dignity. That's what we're about here today. Thank you.
Good morning, and thank you all for being here. My name is Lisa Gillette, and I'm the Executive Director of Foster Forward. We stand together today with our partners across Rhode Island, unified in our concern about the profound harm the new HUD NOFO will cause for the people we serve. I want to especially thank Michelle Wilcox and Crossroads Rhode Island for leading the way in raising awareness about the devastating local impact this policy shift will have on our neighbors. I'm here to speak specifically about the impact on young people ages 18 to 24 who are experiencing homelessness. According to our state's HMIS, or Homeless Management Information System data, 136 youth were in emergency shelter or completely unsheltered just within the last 2 weeks. These are teenagers and young adults, many of them aging out of foster care with no safe place to sleep. Foster Forward expanded into rapid rehousing in 2018 because the need was urgent and undeniable. National research shows that 1 in 4 youth leaving foster care will experience homelessness within a year of leaving the child welfare system. And without effective early intervention, homelessness for young people becomes more likely to be repeated and eventually become chronic. Rapid rehousing has been one of the most effective tools we have to interrupt this trajectory quickly, safely, and with dignity. Our HUD-funded rapid rehousing program has a strong, proven track record. 95% of the youth we serve obtained housing while enrolled. 84% of them engaged in additional services and programs that we were offering, including workforce development, financial literacy, and mental health supports. And 75% exited the program to permanent housing, marking a meaningful and lasting step towards stability. These outcomes are not abstract. They represent real young people who are now safely in apartments, working, attending school, and building their futures. The new HUD rules threaten to dismantle programs like ours that are working. They restrict the very tools that have helped Rhode Island's young adults escape homelessness and rebuild their lives. And if these resources are reduced or redirected, the youth will pay the price, and they are the same ones who are already experiencing instability and disruption through no fault of their own. Today, as we raise awareness about this harmful policy shift, we also want to thank our congressional delegation who are already working hard to protect these programs and defend the young people who rely on them. Their leadership gives us hope. Rhode Island's youth cannot afford to lose the lifeline that rapid rehousing provides. Their future depends on it. Thank you. And at this time, it's my pleasure to introduce the CEO of House of Hope, one of the greatest champions. Without her ardent and steadfast leadership, the Echo Village project would have never come to fruition. Please join me in welcoming Laura Jaworski.
Thank you, Lisa. My name is Laura Jaworski, and I serve as the Executive Director at House of Hope CDC. A number of years ago, House of Hope changed our mission to start with one sentence, and that is that we believe that housing is a basic human right. Just pause for a moment.
You got the ambulance, I got the truck.
Two pieces to say on that. Never did I imagine that I would have to fight for that simple sentence more than I have had to in the last 5 years. But I'll say that I couldn't be more honored to lead and be a part of that fight with my colleagues standing behind me on behalf of so many Rhode Islanders. House of Hope works directly with folks who have experienced the most extreme forms of homelessness. Long-term street homelessness that is often paired with unfathomable traumas and complex behavioral health challenges. I'm here today to speak on behalf of those voices, our chronically homeless, high-needs Rhode Islanders who have spent months, years, living unsheltered, sleeping in cars, tents, abandoned buildings, and under bridges. Individuals who have cycled through shelters, emergency rooms, psychiatric hospitals, and incarceration. And not because they are unwilling to receive support, but because our systems have never offered them the stability that they need to heal. For these individuals, permanent housing is often the very first time in years that they have a key, a door that locks, and a safe place to keep their belongings and medications, as well as the privacy to begin to trust other people again. This new NOFO takes us backwards. It shifts funding away from permanent housing and towards treatment first and institutional or transitional models. It effectively punishes programs that offer low barrier, voluntary services, and instead rewards those programs that mandate required participation in treatment or on-site services in order to either get or keep housing. For the people that House of Hope and my fellow agencies are serving, that is a recipe for failure and one that equals more time on the streets. People living with chronic mental illness and substance use disorders, especially those who have been unsheltered, do not get better in chaos. They do not stabilize when they are bounced between shelters, detox, and short-term programs. By making housing conditional on treatment, we are saying you must get better before you're allowed to be safe. That strips a person of their dignity, it's punitive, and threatens the foundation of trust that our teams are working tirelessly to build with those we serve. If someone misses an appointment, relapses, or is too symptomatic, under these proposed rules, they risk losing their housing. A person that may be experiencing schizophrenia or an active substance use disorder, that is almost guaranteed to lead to an eviction and a return to street homelessness, resulting in longer periods of street homelessness for those who are already the most vulnerable. Let me be clear, this is not reform. This is a pipeline from the street to the cell block and the psych ward. We have housed people who have been living outside for 5, 10, 15, 20 years. Once they have a permanent home, a door that locks, and that safe, dignified place to sleep and stay every night, we see emergency room visits drop, symptoms improve, and for the very first time, they begin to imagine a different future. And for our unsheltered neighbors, losing permanent housing doesn't just mean losing a roof. It means losing medications, contact with providers, fragile progress, and starting all over again if they survive. When we fail chronically homeless individuals who are also struggling with high needs, we don't save money, we shift costs. People will return to those emergency rooms, inpatient psych units, detox programs, and the criminal legal system. Those are the most expensive, least effective places to treat poverty, trauma, and illness. So we stand here today to urge HUD and our federal partners to reverse this dangerous shift. And also on behalf of chronically homeless Rhode Islanders, people that are experiencing chronic mental illness, substance use disorders, and years of unsheltered homelessness, I am imploring our leaders to protect the housing that keeps them alive, to reject the policies that will prolong homelessness and drive more folks into institutions. I want to now welcome Vanessa Volz, President and CEO of Sojourner House, to the podium.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. My name is Vanessa Volz. I'm the President and CEO of Sojourner House, and I'd like to take just a couple minutes and talk about housing as safety. If you're not familiar with Sojourner House, we are a victim services agency. We provide a wide range of crisis intervention services, supportive services, and very importantly, permanent supportive housing for survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, and human trafficking. We originally were founded as a crisis intervention organization in the 70s. We established a shelter system, we provided community-based services, and we've now spent the better part of the last 10 years really creating a permanent supportive housing program, because we have learned along the way that survivors of abuse, once the initial crisis has stabilized, they really need permanent ongoing support. And in order for that support to be most effective, they need a safe place to call home. When someone is in an abusive situation, they often have nowhere to go. They exhaust opportunities to stay with friends and family, and shelters are temporary and cannot provide long-term support, especially if individuals have children under the age of 18 with them. Moving from shelter to shelter is extremely disruptive, especially for family units, and doesn't provide a sense of safety and security, which is so important to someone who has experienced abuse. At Sojourner House, we currently have a rapid rehousing and permanent supportive housing program that not only provides supportive services and rental subsidies, but we also, over the last few years, OFO feels like a complete slap in the face, would be an understatement. And what concerns me as well is this concept of forced treatment. And I wanted to just briefly mention 2 points on this. Before I became the CEO at Sojourner House, I practiced disability discrimination law, and I did a lot of work representing clients who had mental health issues. And one of the primary issues that I often found myself advocating for was helping my clients not have to endure forced treatment. And the idea that in order to be eligible for housing, you have to receive mental health treatment, or perhaps receive medication or consent to medication is antithetical to this idea of bodily autonomy that I think we value so much in this country, or we used to value in this country. And it's also very disruptive to victims of abuse who have experienced such trauma and have experienced situations where they have been forced to endure situations where they have not been able to make their own choices around everything from what kind of food to buy to where to live. So this idea that in order to benefit from housing programs that agencies like Sojourner House would provide, could repeat the cycle of abuse that survivors are trying to escape from. So for all of these reasons and many more, we are extremely concerned about where we are headed and how we can continue to serve the victims and families that receive our life-saving support. And I just want to close by mentioning that I've been doing this work, not as long as some of my colleagues, but long enough that I feel like we are unfortunately making 10 steps backwards, maybe more. And it's extremely disheartening to feel like so much advocacy work has been done over the last few decades to prioritize permanent supportive housing, to prioritize individual choice, to prioritize building communities for those who really need a community. And we are headed in the wrong direction with this, and we really need to come together as advocates and say that we don't want to move backwards. We have to continue moving forwards. And so thank you so much for being here today. Thank you for supporting the agencies that are on the ground doing this hard work every day. And with that, I want to welcome Michelle Wilcox back to talk more about some of our allied partners. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Vanessa, and everyone. I'm pleased that a number of other housing partners have joined us today, and there were many more who wanted to be here, but were unfortunately unable to adjust their schedules or pull themselves away from their teams so close to Thanksgiving. But next, I'd like to introduce Eileen Hayes, President and CEO of Amos House, who's going to be able to speak a bit about the strain that these new HUD policies will put on soup kitchens, pantries, and other direct service providers who will need to prepare for more demand as homelessness increases. And then following Eileen, Melina Lodge from the Housing Network will talk about the disruption these policies will cause in the broader market and how the Trump administration's gutting of permanent housing will not only prolong and exacerbate the country's housing crisis. So Eileen, thanks for being here, and please come up to speak.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Eileen. I'm the CEO of Amos House. I was just standing here thinking about remembering when Senator Jack Reed made the announcement of the Housing First program that started many, many years ago in the dining hall of our soup kitchen. And I remember at the time there was so much excitement about this new way of approaching homelessness. And Riverwood was the first organization that provided Housing First. And there was so much excitement, there was so much new learning, and we all worked so closely together at that time to figure out how to unroll this very important model. And some of our partners here were partners then. So unfortunately, I'm old enough to still be here. So at Amos House, we meet people at some of the most vulnerable moments of their lives. We run the Rhode Island's largest soup kitchen. We're now serving over 1,000 meals a day, which is already a crisis because most of those folks are unhoused, or they're housed on the verge of losing their housing because of the cost of housing, the cost of living, and all of the things that make life so incredibly difficult today. We run a number of shelters. We have a family shelter with 57 families and 160 children in one building. And when I reflect on the family shelter, many of those families 2 and 3 years ago could come into shelter, be there for 2 or 3 months, and then move into housing because of rapid rehousing, because of permanent supportive housing. Unfortunately, today, many of those same families are now chronically homeless. They weren't chronically homeless when they came into shelter. But because of the system that has failed us, we now have families that are now considered chronically homeless. So think about how that creates more trauma, more disability, more difficulty in managing life the ability to have your own home, make your own decisions. We have kids at our family shelter who think that that room that they sleep in with their entire family is their home because that's all they've known, many from the time they were 1 year old. So when we think about the loss of this housing first model and the fact that rapid rehousing will also be impacted, we won't be getting people out of shelter. And again, more people will be coming into shelter. But we also at Amos House know that the impact of this will increase the work that we have. As more and more people are coming into our building looking for help to get training in workforce development, to have access to our outreach team, to get help in our behavioral health clinic. Many of the people, as Ben had talked about, that come into our clinic are unhoused or very newly housed. And they're not coming to treatment because they've been mandated. This idea that the only way people will access recovery services or treatment services is because somebody tells them they have to is just not true. Our folks are desperate for help. But if they come into our shelter, if they go through the ASU and then they go back to the street, it's almost impossible for them to maintain sobriety on the street. And then we kind of blame them. We're blaming the victim right here and saying that because of what happened to you, it's now your fault, rather than, again, a system that has failed. This new NOFO rules represent a fundamental shift away from permanent housing, a model that has been proven, as everybody else has said. And we are not a housing first provider. We provide housing for folks that come through a treatment program to housing, but we don't put them on the street. But we're also part of the continuum that we believe very strongly must exist. And I am just as devastated as my colleagues here over losing this important model. We're talking about real families, seniors, survivors of domestic violence, veterans, youth aging out of foster care, and people living with chronic health and medical challenges. And for direct services like us who have already been hit with the delays in SNAP benefits and the record number of people that are waiting to get into our shelter, we're really worried about what will happen if this additional thing happens and people lose their housing. So let's be clear. We all support more access to mental health treatment and addiction recovery services, but treatment doesn't work if you don't have a home. We agree with that 100%. Housing is health care. I think somebody else already said that. Permanent housing is the foundation that makes every other intervention, from counseling to recovery to workforce development, more effective. Removing that foundation sets people up to fail. These new HUD rules are short-sighted and dangerous, and they ignore decades of evidence, and they punish the very people federal housing programs were designed to protect. We cannot allow these changes to take our state and our country backward. We urge federal officials to reverse course immediately, and we call on state leaders, our congressional delegation, and every Rhode Islander who believes in the dignity and stability of housing to stand with us. This is beyond service providers. This is every Rhode Islander should be concerned about this. Permanent housing works, it saves lives, and it ultimately saves taxpayer dollars. And today we call on all of you to help join in this fight. Thank you so much. And I'm now going to bring Melina Lodge up.
Good morning. My name is Melina Lodge. I'm the Executive Director of the Housing Network of Rhode Island. We serve as an advocacy policy organization working to expand the supply of and access to affordable housing across the state. And you've heard from the previous speakers behind me around the impact that this NOFO will have on more than 1,000 vulnerable Rhode Islanders whose housing stability depends on these resources, and without these resources will become unhoused again. I think the speakers before me also did a great job of illustrating the very rich tapestry that Rhode Island benefits from the housing and homeless organizations that work really hard every day to serve our neighbors in crisis. And I'm proud to stand with these folks as well as the hundreds of others that do this work day in and day out against great odds many times. Over the last 4 years, housing has become one of the most urgent policy issues for legislators, state leaders, and local officials. I think it's hard to recall a single week without media coverage highlighting yet another facet of our housing crisis. And for those of you in the media today who've been at the forefront of these stories, I believe you actually know just how strained and fragile our housing and homelessness system really is. The truth is this: we do not have enough resources, enough shelter beds, enough supportive services, enough affordable housing to meet the needs of every Rhode Islander seeking help. And this NOFA does nothing to support that and help improve those situations for Rhode Islanders. Experts have told you permanent supportive housing works. It doesn't only work for the household who benefits directly from the housing unit, but for our communities and the state as a whole. It is proven time and time again that it is more cost effective to invest in housing stabilization than to pay the far higher costs when we fail to do so. And these proposed changes will create devastating ripple effects across Rhode Island, harming not only individuals, but landlords, cities and towns, our healthcare and court systems, and our business community. Affordable housing developments already operate on razor-thin margins. The homes that are intended to serve extremely low-income households, like these operated by the folks behind me, depend desperately on Continuum of Care funding to operate safely and sustainably. The rents that tenants are able to afford when they're extremely low income simply do not cover the true cost of maintaining high-quality housing, especially amid rising operating expenses. And redirecting funds away from sustainable, permanent, supportive housing developments will lead to disinvestment, deterioration, and potentially even closure of our vital housing stock. And in turn, when those properties decline, surrounding neighborhoods will feel the impact, eroding property values and straining municipal budgets that rely heavily on property taxes in our state. This NOFA proposes to tear at the fabric of proven programs and organizations that stitch together our very complex housing system, an ecosystem which countless Rhode Islanders depend on for stability and dignity. And the NOFA effectively says, we see what you're doing, we see what's working, and now we're going to do the opposite. And so today, we are standing united in saying this is unacceptable. Thank you.
Thank you, Melina. Thank you all for being here this morning, and thank you to every one of our partners for your powerful remarks and for the work that you do every day to keep Rhode Islanders safe and housed. We're grateful to the media for showing up and helping us shine a light on what these new HUD rules will mean for real people across Rhode Island. The danger is clear. Slashing permanent housing funding will push families, older adults, domestic violence survivors, and veterans back into homelessness and overwhelm every part of our safety net. That's why we're standing here today. With that, we're happy to take any questions that you might have. So the funding for the FY25 NOFO would typically start January 1. HUD has informed, because the NOFO was issued late, that we wouldn't expect decisions and funding to begin until May 1st. So that's an added challenge because there are some providers whose every provider's contract starts at a different kind of point during the year, but there are some providers in Rhode Island whose programs are scheduled to start as of March. I think Community Care has one of those. Is that correct? So there's a real impact there in terms of a gap in funding, even under the best case scenario.
What exactly have politicians been telling you about the work that they're doing to try to make sure that this doesn't fully go through?
I don't want to. If anybody else wants to answer that question, I think we've been in really close contact with the congressional delegation, and have started now conversations with our leaders at the state level, and certainly on this as a federal program, the congressional delegation is working hard with their colleagues to try to impact HUD's decision. There was a letter that was sent to HUD, the HUD secretary, by quite a number of Republican congressional members asking HUD to not implement this new NOFO that was sent a number of weeks ago. So there's definitely advocacy and work happening, but so far it doesn't seem to have taken hold. So.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all very much. Thanks for being here in the cold.